When you hear the phrase classical music, what comes to mind exactly? For most people, it would be names like Mozart and Brahms and Haydn, all of that European classical music, which is classical music, yes, but I tend to think of things much more broadly. For me, when I hear the phrase classical music, I think of instruments like the oud, the arhu, or the shamisen, all of the sounds created beautifully by folks throughout the Middle East and the Far East. I think about the unique contributions that the Indian subcontinent has given the world when it comes to classical music when we look at their own traditions. Even the African continent, the origin of humanity is also the origin of music. And we see that through the tradition of African drumming really taking hold not only across the motherland, but throughout the world, especially in South America and Central America. So, with that context in mind, what is America's unique contribution to this idea of classical music that goes beyond centering a Western European definition of that phrase and that aesthetic? Well, with the exception of music codified by indigenous communities, there is no music in the United States that was born here quite like black music. The Negro spirituals and the field hollers and so much of that other black music that grew to evolve into blues, jazz, gospel, R&B, and even hip hop. I believe that those are our unique contributions to the world of classical musics. The idea of black music being at the foundation of American music has even been affirmed by leading European figures, most famously Antonin Dvorak, who said, "In the Negro melodies of America, I find all that is needed for a great and noble school of music." If you take a look at what schools, conservatories, orchestras, and other performing arts institutions center today, unfortunately, no one really grabbed hold of what Antonin Dvorak affirmed. We have continued to center a Western European aesthetic of music when we use that phrase classical music, but I believe that we have to go well beyond that, not only for the sake of music, but for the sake of audiences and for the sake of affirming people musically through any and every community possible. My name is Garrett McQueen, and I do that work as president of Trillworks Media, home to the Trilloquy podcast and a vast array of content created at the intersections of race, contemporary culture, and so called classical music. Since 2020, I've been working independently right here from Studio G, producing content that challenges our ideas of that phrase classical music toward a renewed use of it and ultimately a renewed application of it in all of our teaching institutions and performing arts organizations through dialogue with individuals, collaboration with existing arts institutions, and a recontextualization of the so called classical experience. I'm working to push our industry toward a level of cultural competency that it has never seen before. So, how do I do this exactly? What does the work look like? Well, I'll offer just a few examples. First and foremost, I love working in the podcasting space, and I'll offer a clip from a conversation I had with a Louisville based cellist and musicologist named John Sopayamanat. He takes that idea of decolonization or a colonized mind, and in this clip, engages it as it applied to his own life. Take a listen.
I've told this story many times, and I still feel terrible about it because I remember when I started to think my mom was singing out of tune when she would sing Thai songs, and I'm like, when I got to music school, when I started exploring, my Thai musical roots, I realized, oh well, Thai tuning systems are completely different than Western tuning systems. So this is not long after I started playing the cello and was taught how to play in tune, quote unquote. It's really difficult because I'm still discovering things that I would never have thought about in that context until I really really just approached it as that the idea that my mind has been colonized.
So once we're able to determine the ways in which our minds and ears have been colonized towards centering Western Europe, we have to do something about that, right? Well, I engage that part of the work through my radio production. I have the great honor of being a substitute host across the country in a number of radio markets. And to classical music listeners in St. Louis, Missouri, I offered proximity between an autumnal piece of music by Eric Whitacre called October to another work that I believe is also not only autumnal, but an example of America's classical music. It's getting to be that time of year when you can feel a slight chill in the mornings, at least if you wake up early enough, right? The season of orange and red leaves and pumpkin spice things is coming up just around the corner. There's lots of music that celebrates the changing of seasons, including this one. It's even named after an autumn month. The composer definitely had autumn in mind when he wrote it, but there's even more to this piece of music than just cooler temperatures and changing leaves. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in about 5 minutes. I have to say, though, when I think about this time of year, impending autumn, I can't help but to think back to high school football season when the band would play those classic tunes like September. Do you remember? That's even the opening question of the tune, right? Do you remember September by Earth, Wind, and Fire? While digital content and radio broadcast content are the core of what I do these days, I've also had the great opportunity of engaging live audiences in these discussions. I've been in front of countless schools, conservatories, and students talking about decolonizing classical music and affirming their own sensibilities when it comes to what we should consider classical. I've even had the great opportunity of re engaging my first love of playing the bassoon by offering world premieres of solo works that challenge that traditional definition of classical music. I even earlier this year had the opportunity to conduct the world premiere of an opera written by a black composer and librettist that help audiences understand that there's so much more to this thing that we call classical music than what we've been taught. So, how do we keep this going? What's your role in the conversation of decolonizing classical music? Well, to that, I'll offer a few things. First and foremost, we have to really accept the fact that our definitions of classical music were conditioned on us. We were taught to center Western Europe, and that's something that we have to unteach, not only for ourselves, but through everything we do with other people and in the ways we engage the phrase and the idea of classical music. We have to integrate black music into all of our work toward honoring the legacy of field hollers, the Negro spiritual, and all of that American music that is really foundational to who we are as a people. And of course, finally, we have to help people everywhere we are so that we have a united front. Folks who work inside institutions need to support individual creators and activists like myself, and vice versa, so that we're all on the same page toward moving to a future that really looks like everyone. That's the ultimate goal, right? To make sure that through our arts programming and through what we present, all people, no matter their backgrounds, see themselves affirmed, not only musically, but culturally and through their lived experiences. This is something that art spaces have never really seen before, at least not on a broad scale, which means that our approach to this has to be completely different. I changed my approach to music by leaving the stage and centering digital creation, radio production, and curation toward that renewed goal. How can you do that? That's up to you to determine, but we all have to figure out how we can do our part in paving the way for not only a renewed arts ecosystem, but a renewed society in general. I believe that we can decolonize classical music toward affirming all of us through what we offer in art spaces in our own unique ways, and I believe that you can be a part of it. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. I hope that I've said something that will inspire you to make the changes that we need to do to get to a decolonized ecosystem of classical music here in the United States and around the world, to freedom.